You ready? Yes. I'll call this meeting to order according to the open meetings law. The Lake Hopatcong Commission has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof delivered and mailed or electronically mailed to the following: Daily Record, posted on the Lake Hopatcong Commission website. Please stand joining the salute
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You remain standing for a moment of silence for the two servicemen who lost in Afghanistan this weekend. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Crowley?
Here.
Commissioner Fish?
Here.
Commissioner McCarthy?
Here.
Commissioner Wazowski?
Here.
Commissioner Cross? Here. Commissioner Savas? Steindown?
Here.
Stevens?
Here.
Tessier?
Here.
Wilczek?
Here.
Senator?
Here.
Will Susan? Castellon? Here. Solaro?
Here.
Spurfield?
Here.
Foley?
Here.
And Smith?
Here.
Very good.
I'd like a motion to go into a short executive session to discuss personnel and legal matters. So moved.
Need a second?
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Do a quick short. I'll be right back. All right, we're back in public session. Entertain a motion to out of executive session. So moved. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're back in public. Motion to approve the minutes. So moved. Any comments, questions, additions, deletions from the minutes? Roll, please.
Crowley?
Yes.
Fish?
Yes.
McCarthy?
Yes.
Wazowski?
Yes.
Cross? Abstain. Steindown?
Yes.
Stevens?
Yes.
Tessier?
Yes. Is that here?
No.
So I abstain.
Solaro?
Yes.
And Smith?
Yes. I need, we have the treasurer's report and list of bills for payment.
Yeah. The bank statement as of 12/31/19 shows a balance of $138,278.11. We have 8 bills outstanding totaling $12,630.12. Other than that,
The motion to pay the bill list for $12,630.12.
I'll make the motion.
Second. Anybody have any comments or questions on the bills listed?
Yeah, I have a question, Colleen, on some of the bills, were any of the bills covered under the grant? A grant for the Hopatcong watershed?
None of these were. No, I just received the WIP invoice today, and I didn't get any of the list of them.
I know that the commission years ago used to have 2 bank accounts, one for grant money to flow through, and then a general one.
We can separate them by account.
Well, some grantees force you to have a dedicated bank account, but I mean, we don't have that many volume of transactions going through that we can't keep track of.
Not a problem. Good.
Crowley?
Yes.
Fish?
Yes.
McCarthy?
Yes.
Wazowski?
Yes.
Cross? Yes. Steindown?
Yes.
Stevens?
Yes.
Tessier?
Yes.
Solaro?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes. Any correspondence?
Yes. So any land use applications which have slow with the holidays will be up on the OneDrive account, and I'll send those out as they come in. We received the engagement letter from Samuel Klein and Company for our audit, which we'll vote on later. We were CC'd on the Weldon Quarry letter providing an update, which we can give a brief summary on what that is. And then we received requests for support letters for the Morris County Parks Commission and coordinated effort with Langton on the university for the flotation boat, NJIT for a flotation boat for the HABS grant through DEP. So I think we agreed that we would possibly try and do a letter of support for the police county clerk. We're going to talk to them about possibly submitting a joint application.
You could grab that.
Yep.
You're up.
Yes.
I'll let you talk about the important stuff first.
Well, as perfect lead-in, as was just stated, we did get our EPA grant in. Right after this meeting, I think it was, we decided it was probably about the next day that the EPA grant was filed, and we filed for $990,000. That's the one where there'll be 6 nationwide grants for up to $1 million each. So, and that we won't hear on for about 6 months.
Yes, June something.
So that was good, and that was a real good collaborative effort. And I have to say, up until the day before we know we'd be able to file, Mikey Sherrill's office actually opened up the door that we could file that grant, so that was very helpful. The DEP grant, the one you've been seeing in the newspapers a lot for the HABS research, it's basically, it was when the governor came here, that initiative. And that one's up to $500,000 a piece. And that one was originally due today. It has been delayed for 2 weeks, largely because of a lot of complaining by the group you see in front of you.
It was your record.
No, there's a lot of, but just because originally they wanted 1/3 of the match up front in cash, and not a lot of groups like ours collectively have 1/3 of the money to put up front in cash. So as of Friday, we kind of knew it was coming, but on Friday they made it official. The grant now can be, if it's in cash, it doesn't have to be up front, or they will allow in-kind service to be put off as the match also. So we've been having a lot of continuing dialogue now collectively as to how to modify where we were headed. The mayors had agreed to some proposals to push forward. There's now a little reason with the matches and everything to modify them, and also based on some of the research that's been done. So the good news is, I think we can safely say that the Lake Hopatcong Commission will now file that grant 2 weeks from today, and hopefully we'll be in the neighborhood of asking for $500,000.
And for the counties are going to.
Yeah, that's the next really good part. Toward the cash match, and also to just show us a good sign of support, as of Friday, we got the word. Yeah, Friday, both Morris and Sussex County have each pledged $25,000 each toward the HABS research, which will go toward a cash match of that grant, and also just to demonstrate their strong support for our efforts here at Lake Hopatcong. So I can't even begin to tell you how thrilled I am that both freeholder boards have
What
come
about the
across.
municipality?
The municipalities are going to each put in. We haven't confirmed that with them yet because they have to see the final grant proposal, but we believe they're going to put in up to $15,000 each in-kind support, not in cash, but like DPW type of support and other types of matches. So, I think where you can see where this is headed is it's a really nice collaborative grant. And we're going to, as you just heard, talk to Morris County Parks, and we're also going to talk to
actually to Rutgers to see if there may be a little piece in that for all of them. So we're hoping we get a really nice grant, and most importantly of this is the work that it can do for Lake Hopatcong. I mean, we're talking about demonstration projects that are really serious and meaningful. Like, you know how like this year, once the green appeared, I mean, we're doing a lot of long-term things to try to not make it appear, but if it appears, if you remember when we went to the state, there was no state-approved process to deal with it. You know, we can argue whether alum or peroxide or aeration. Remember we all had to turn on our bubblers? Well, we really didn't know what to do. So these demo projects are really just, you know, kind of give the DEP the ability to say yes, like, hey, we have a problem here. Do we aerate? Can we circulate? Can we dump in whatever? So, so that's really, you know, it really is important that this go through. We expect these awards to be made in the middle of April. So, you know, all really kind of good news on that. And like I said, I couldn't be more thrilled with what the freeholders have done. I mean, that's really just tremendous. And the towns, you know, have all been 100% behind this. And finally, on Thursday, we're doing a road trip together. It's that, you know, a lot of folks in this room and in the entire community had a lot of problems with following the strategy document that the state had last year. In other words, on you know, what the levels were for the warnings on the lake and the signs that went up on the highways and things of that nature. Fred and Steve Souza led a group of the lakes, really, included us, Greenwood Lake, and Deal Lake, that came up with a white paper that was submitted to DEP with a whole bunch of recommendations. I know you all received a copy of that white paper. And we're going to meet with the Associate Commissioner, Katie Angeron, on Thursday to discuss it. So, you know, and here again, it's just a joint group going down there to talk about it. Hopefully also it leads to a statewide lakes organization that's going to have some backbone and power behind it.
And we really have to thank Fred and Steve for taking 3 different lakes. I mean, you think of how many different kind of slightly different opinions we have here, and it's like they were dealing with 3 lakes groups all saying, well, we should include this, but we shouldn't be too. And they really took all of the things we talked about around that table and created a white paper that I think is really reflective of kind of the shared experience that we all dealt with and responding to what can be improved without going insane yet. So good job.
And I do want to say something about, like, we have driven Colleen totally crazy over the last few weeks. And on Friday, like, I was going into the city and we got the call that, like, the freeholders needed a letter, like, immediately that they could sign. And someone had it to both freeholder boards written and on their desk by noon. So thank you very, very much.
And I want to thank you on behalf of the commission for a lot of time and effort into this one.
Hey, I'm retired. It keeps me out of trouble.
That was it for your serious stuff, right? I have no more fun stuff. So we did have the trainings that we share, which we had about 500 people come through for the 2 weekends we had it here in this space, and hopefully even bigger next year. But coming up in the next couple months, we have the Landing Crossroads of Lake Hopatcong winter program coming up on January 23rd at 7 p.m. On February 20th, also at 7 p.m., we have the New Jersey Highlands Rediscovered presentation. And then on March 19th, also at 7, we have a Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Preservation and Grace, an American Legacy. It's a, what's the word, a person who mimics. What is that, like a, what's the name? Yes, there we go. So she'll be here during the presentation. And all part of our humanities efforts. And you can register for any of those on our website. I know that the Jackie Kennedy one is filling up very quickly. So if you're interested in that one, I would get on there right away and sign up. The other 2 are also starting to see some good registration. So trying to continue to use this space to be a place that brings the community together for the benefit of the lake, but also just bringing everybody together in the 4 towns for learning opportunities. We also have our block party registration open to return. If you're a returning vendor, if you've been a vendor at the block party organization in the past, you should have received outreach from our block party team. And we have the early bird registration period is coming to an end at the end of this month, and then in February it opens up to the greater community. So you should see more information about that. But if you, especially if you are a return vendor and you want to come back and you haven't seen anything about it, this email is just blockparty@lakehopatcongfoundation.org. It goes to all three of our event organizers, and they will help you with whatever you need. But that's coming up, and we have to thank the state park for always being a great partner for that event. That's coming up on May 9th. And I'm sure it'll be here before we know it. Is there any questions on? I don't think there's a lot more. We've had the holidays since the last time we were here, so not as much has happened. Okay.
That's it, good. So while you stay here, Justin McCarthy, who's got a presentation to make, he took on a personal project himself. I'd like to make a presentation.
Hi. In recognition of the Lake Hopatcong Foundation's gorgeous restoration of the Lake Hopatcong train station, my father and I wanted to do something to hang in the station. So I spent my winter break putting this together. I'd like to read the back. I wrote something. In recognition of the Lake Hopatcong Foundation's faithful restoration of the Lake Hopatcong train station, my father and I present this plaque. The Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad precipitated the creation of the Lake Hopatcong station. It is our hope that one day visitors will arrive at this station via the rails from below, from both east and west, ascend the stairs from the platform below, admire this station, and learn something before enjoying their day on Lake Hopatcong, as they once did.
Oh, I still remember as a little kid with the coffee cups that made collections at your school, so thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Look good at the ticket window.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
Wow, I'm gonna come to these meetings all the time, they just get us presents.
Right, you ready for Princeton Hydro report?
So yeah, I'm going to give a 10-minute summary of the 2019 water quality monitoring data that was collected on Lake Hopatcong. So I have a slide presentation I'd like to give.
Hold on. It's gonna be there. Yeah, okay.
Okay. We're doing much better.
Yeah, you can see it was very.
Sorry.
We may not invite you again, Marty.
Look, there's a, yeah. Thanks, yes.
No one falls asleep, please.
That should work. That's good.
All right, so just to let everyone know, there's been a pretty long-term, over 30-year database of water quality information collected on Lake Hopatcong. It actually started in the early 80s, but the consistent water quality monitoring really got going in the early 90s. So this provides a very unique insight into Lake Hopatcong. It really helped us identify the cause of the pollution that occurred. So we do have this long-term monitoring, and I've said this before, my entire consulting career has been associated with Lake Hopatcong, which I find very cool. There's 11 sampling stations, routine sampling stations. 2 of them are in situ monitoring, and when you hear the word in situ, it basically means you're using a meter to measure something: temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, conductivity. And then we collect discrete samples. Those are samples that we collect in a water sample, and we send them to a lab. If it's biological, we do them in-house. If it's chemical, we send it to a state and EPA certified lab. We have 1 deep water sampling station, and that's mid-lake. We typically do 5 events over the course of the growing season, from May through September. We measure total phosphorus, nitrate, ammonia, total suspended solids, and chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is the pigment all algae have. So it's a way of measuring the amount of algae in the water. And then we also do vertical tows from where there's oxygen in the deeper waters up to the surface for both phytoplankton and zooplankton. Phytoplankton are the little algae. zooplankton or little micro animals that eat the algae. So here's a shot of the lake, and this is just showing you the stations. This is the mid-lake station here. Here's River Styx, Crescent Cove. So north is that way, and these stations have been monitored consistently since the early 90s. This is showing you a vertical profile of Lake Hopatcong at that deep mid-lake section. This is in May. You can already see the lake is thermally stratified pretty deep. And what that means is if you've ever been in a lake, you go down and all of a sudden you get cold really quick because there's this big drop in temperature. And usually in the early part of the season, that drop in temperature will start pretty deep. When you have that big change in temperature, it sort of seals the surface waters from the deep waters. And that can result in a depletion of dissolved oxygen. And we do see that in May, well oxygenated, up around 9 milligrams per liter. Down at the bottom here, down around 3 milligrams per liter. For a healthy system, in the surface, you want like 5 milligrams per liter for a nice, healthy aquatic system. So that was May. Once you hit July, summer, the height of the summer, this is what you see. So you have that thermal stratification. So if you were like diving into the lake in July and dive a little further, deeper down, and you get that cold feeling, it's because of that quick change in temperature. But that quick change in temperature is also a difference in density. And there's plenty of light up here for the algae to photosynthesize. You're having wind and atmosphere reoxygenating the waters. Deep water down here, nothing photosynthesizing and no exchange with the atmosphere. This is what happens. You run out of oxygen. No oxygen at the bottom during the summer months. And I've said before that when we look at your annual phosphorus budget, your internal load of phosphorus coming up from the sediments is only about 10% of that annual load. What happens is when your dissolved oxygen falls below 1, there's this chemical bond between phosphorus and iron that's broken. When that breaks, that phosphorus starts to leach up into the overlying waters. Keep that in mind, because this is going to be part of a larger story as I go through this. So that's what happens with the lake. Your lake is called dimictic, which means it mixes after, if we ever get ice again, once we have ice and it ices out, the lake will mix. And then you have that thermal stratification, and then it mixes again in the fall. Dimictic mixes twice a year, spring and fall. As we went from spring into summer, this is, and I showed this at some of the public meetings earlier, we had these large, very severe but very short storms. And this is what set up for the halves this year, not only in Lake Hopatcong, but regionally. Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Is we have these intense storms, then we have a few days of sunny weather. Large storm, sunny weather. Perfect conditions, you're rinsing the watershed, all the nutrients are going in. You have some nice sunny weather in between, that stimulates the algal growth. This is really what sparked the halves in 2019. And this is really telling right here. When you look at your phosphorus concentration, so this is all for 2019, this is all of the stations, here's the average. So our plan for Lake Hopatcong is we want to keep the average phosphorus concentration at 0.03 or lower. In June, we were above 0.03, we were at 0.043. So this is really what triggered the blooms. When we were out in June, we were literally out there less than a week before the blooms hit. So it's not surprising we saw these elevated phosphorus concentrations. Now look, I'm saying if you're at 0.04, that can trigger a bloom. Look at the bottom water. So in May and June, not very high. Once you get into the summer, when it's thermally stratified, no oxygen, huge amounts of phosphorus coming up from the sediments. So if you want an algae bloom, you need 3 things. You need high seasonal temperatures, you need still water conditions, and you need elevated phosphorus concentrations, particularly for the cyanobacteria. To photosynthesize, a lot of them can fix their own nitrogen. So they can pull nitrogen right out of the atmosphere, but to do that, they need a lot of phosphorus. So that's why when you see phosphorus concentrations increase, not only do you have more algae, you get more of the bad algae, cyanobacteria. So of these three parameters, the one that we can really focus on is minimizing the amount of nutrients going into the water column. On top of this, so we did have issues with elevated phosphorus, but I do want to keep this in mind. If you look at the annual temperature in the northeast of US, you can see there's been this steady increase. And just out of curiosity, I had one of our scientists so again, we have a 30-year database. I asked him just to take the mid-lake surface water temperature for our 30-year database, and I just wanted to see what it would look like. Just go to the next one. And this is Lake Hopatcong. This is your surface water temperature. This is a statistically significant trend that from the late 80s to 2019, there's been this steady increase in temperature in your surface waters. And I put this little brown trout here to remind me to tell you, every year in your water quality report, we evaluate the optimal and carryover habitat for brown trout. So of all the trout, brown trout are the ones that are most resilient in terms of they can withstand temperatures of up to 26 degrees Celsius, but they need dissolved oxygen of 5 milligrams per liter or more. And every year we evaluate Lake Hopatcong, and Lake Hopatcong usually has carryover habitat at the mid-lake station. This is the first year where 1 month there was not even carryover habitat for these trout. That's pretty substantial. Now, fortunately, some of the deeper other areas of the lake, we did have carryover habitat. And again, that carryover habitat is you need 5 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen, and the temperature needs to be 26 degrees or lower. That's scary, because that's saying the lake is getting warmer. Not only that, but we're going to lose potential habitat for some of these valuable recreational fish, such as brown trout. And I've showed this before. This is just showing you, I want to emphasize that when you look at the average June total phosphorus concentrations, before the commission was formed, we had some pretty elevated concentrations. Once the commission was formed, and they had funding to implement a variety of projects, clean out catch basins, keep up with the weed harvesting, install BMPs, public education, and about here is where some of the grants kicked in. By the time we got here, the grants ended, and the commission had no funds. And look at over the last 4 or 5 years, the average phosphorus concentration was creeping up. And this is the year we had the halves. That was one of the highest concentrations we've seen over the last 20 years, was just in 2019. So it was basically a siren going off that we need to do something. We need to get this phosphorus back under control, because during these years, when we were below that 0.03, the big complaint was weeds. Clear water, when there's clear water, the light's hitting the sediments, you have more plants. And of plants or halves, you'd rather be managing the plants than the halves. The halves are the ones that are generating those cyanotoxins, and that was the whole issue about triggering beach closures and state advisories. So we want to get the phosphorus under control. And this was basically the outcome. So I'm going to wrap up just showing you some of our long-term data. So this is total phosphorus. This is at the, again, long-term data at the surface, the mid-lake sampling station. So again, we had higher concentrations, but back in the 90s, when we had these higher concentrations, we didn't have the warm conditions we do now. So we did get phosphorus under control, but I am concerned. This is at the mid-lake for all the data. You can see that we've been having these higher concentrations. The average hasn't hit 0.03, but it hit 0.02, which is, again, we're seeing this sort of movement since the beginning of 2010. We've been seeing phosphorus sort of creep up in the mid-lake station. This is also very concerning to me. So if, again, you look at, 2010 to the end of this decade, there's a lot of variability in the average amount of algae, chlorophyll A, but you can see it's been increasing. And look at 2019. That average concentration was hitting 14. For the TMDL, we want that to be our maximum, not our average. Again, a wake-up call. We need to reduce those nutrients going in. And then finally, Secchi depth, an alternating black and white disk you lower in to measure water clarity. We want it to be a meter or deeper, to have nice clear water. The average was greater than a meter, which is good, but look how low it was in 2019. And again, it's because of those blooms. Blooms make the water cloudy. It doesn't look as attractive. Again, another wake-up call that we have to be concerned about this, and we really need to focus, and that's why we're focusing so much on looking for funding to implement these projects. We're revising the watershed implementation plan with funds provided by the New Jersey Highlands Council, but that's the value of this data. And I know from the data, because during those public meetings, people were pointing fingers saying this and that, and I know from the data we have that June, that wet June, with the sunny conditions, rinsed the watershed, because when the blooms hit, they hit all over. It was like a green ring started, and then it started moving all over the place. Now, one thing we are going to be doing, remember I was talking about how you run out of oxygen at the bottom, and on an annual basis, your internal load is only 10%. Well, with some of the funds that we're going to be asking for through New Jersey DEP, we're going to take this 30-year database, and we're going to take 30 years of weather data, and we're going to determine on a monthly and summer basis what that contribution is. Because even on an annual basis, if the internal load is only 10%, that's not big. But during a dry summer, maybe it's accounting for 50% of that. And the other thing, too, to keep in mind is these cyanobacteria, they have gas vacuoles, so they can move up and down the water column. So if you want sunlight, you create the gas vacuoles, float up. And if you're hungry and you want nutrients, you collapse those gas vacuoles and you can sink down into the deeper waters where all that phosphorus is. So again, that's a mechanism we have to take into account as we look at this data. So that's what we're going to be doing. I have one other thing before I get to the conclusion. So mechanical weed harvesting, we always evaluate how much material is removed. There was a smaller amount removed this year compared to 2017 and 2018. So about 1,400 cubic yards were removed this year, as opposed to the past 2 previous years where we were at somewhere around 3,900 cubic yards. There were a number of factors that contributed to this. One was we had a very wet spring. And whenever you have a wet spring, the water level's higher, it's cloudier, you don't get as much plant growth going. We had the winter drawdown. You know, and even though we didn't have a very severe winter last year, any sort of exposure to those sediments can help reduce some of that plant growth. But another key is those halves happened early. They happened in June. And again, it's this sort of competition for life. Once those halves were established, and we saw that water clarity was lower, it doesn't give the opportunity for the plants to grow. So when you have clear water, you have plants. When you have cloudy water, you tend to have algae. So those factors really contributed to the lower amount of plant biomass removed. We always translate that cubic yards of material, how much phosphorus that is. So that 1,400 cubic yards was about 227 pounds of phosphorus, or we removed with the harvesting about 250,000 pounds of additional algae that would have been in the lake if that phosphorus remained in there. And this is just showing you the long-term database that was corrected a few years back using the Commission's cubic yards coefficient. And you can see that, 2019 was low, particularly from those last previous years. And again, it was a number of those environmental factors. And I do want to say that of all the activity, the stormwater and septic management and goose control and all the public education, the harvesting does have a value that it's removing nutrients from the water. So if you take the average of this long-term database, about 6% of the phosphorus that needs to be removed to comply with where we want to be at that 0.03 is from harvesting. So the harvesters can be thought of as a giant stormwater BMP, removing nutrients from the water column. So in conclusion, we're obviously going to continue to strongly recommend the long-term water quality monitoring program. I've made some recommendations based on what we saw this past year with the halves. One is I'd like to add an additional parameter. So instead of just measuring total phosphorus, ammonia, nitrogen, chlorophyll, I'd like to measure soluble reactive phosphorus as well. So total phosphorus can be thought of as food. Soluble reactive phosphorus is candy. This is the stuff that, they'll assimilate right away. It's dissolved, it's inorganic, they can just pass it through their cell walls. So I'd like to start measuring it. And that can be really valuable to identify areas that might be problematic where blooms may start early, Or it can also be like a canary in the coal mine if we say, hey, we have some elevated SRP here, there might be a bloom coming. We'd like to include cyanobacteria cell counts at the mid-lake samples. Normally, we just look at the algae and just say, okay, this is the relative amount. We want to actually do cell counts at the mid-lake sample. And the report is done. I reviewed it. Our staff scientist, Katie Walston, did it. She did a great job. I'm not handing it out because I actually have a question for the commission. Katie included the, in addition to the New Jersey DEP cell count thresholds, she also included the World Health Organization one. I guess my question to the commission, because these reports then go online, so anyone can have access to them. You want me to include the World Health Organization information or not? Because it might be confusing to people. I can certainly include it, but I'm leaving it up to the commission if you want to include that or not.
That's not the guidance that's going to.
Correct. It's not what New Jersey follows. They follow.
See, that's what caused a lot of controversy.
And that's
we had a cap. We have to go by New Jersey. Cap.
Okay.
That's what we're governed.
And that's why I wanted
Whether you
to.
like it or not.
Yeah. And we're having that white paper discussion later on this week to talk about modifying their protocol. So what I'll do is we'll remove the World Health Organization stuff. That's why I wanted to bring it to you. So I'll take care of that.
Do you think it's worthwhile to wait until after that meeting to decide?
I can see, yeah, we can certainly
Maybe
do
they're going to
that.
say, who knows, but maybe they're going to say something about offering.
That question was brought up at the round meeting we had last week.
Mm-hmm.
Same question.
Yeah, and it generates confusion. So I think keeping the New Jersey threshold and then wait to see what the outcome of the meeting is, and we can figure that out. Also, I'm recommending, in addition to surface and deep, we start collecting samples mid-depth, so I can get a better view of. Remember, I mentioned how the blue-green algae can move up and down the water column. If we have a mid-depth, we'll be able to assess where they are during certain times of the day, so we can get a better sense of how they're fueling up on the nutrients. And obviously at that mid-depth, we'll be doing additional chemistry. And then the last thing I do want to mention is we're recommending for the 2020 water quality monitoring that the money that's spent for this will be a monetary match for the HABS grant. Because when we're out there collecting this data, we'll also be collecting data at the sites where we're doing these demo projects as well. So I know that's a lot of information, and I'll make sure after we have that meeting to get you the final report, because the foundation, typically you put it on your website then for the public.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Fred?
Yes.
I want to thank you. That's a very lucid presentation. Can you comment further on the relationship between weeds and HABs?
So basically, and in particular in shallower areas, there's a concept called alternative stable states. So basically, when you have lower nutrients, you tend to have clearer water. When you have clear water, sunlight hits the sediments, you'll get more plant growth. Now, even though plant growth can be problematic, it does have a lot of value. It helps to stabilize the sediments. The water is generally clearer. The nutrients go more into the plants than the algae. It's habitat for a variety of organisms, including fish. Now, those weeds have to be managed, and we certainly don't want any exotics like, hydrilla or water chestnut. But there's a certain value to a certain amount of plant growth. When you get the HABs and you get the cyanobacteria, they're not good for anything. They're the bad algae. The good algae are the ones that are like green algae, and diatoms, and chrysophytes. They're ones that thrive when phosphorus is low. And those are the good algae. When you have more phosphorus in freshwater systems, you tend to get more of the cyanobacteria. They're not eaten by other organisms and odor compounds. So of the two situations, the one you'd rather be in is having clear water and managing plants rather than struggling to manage with the HABs.
Did we then consider altering our weed harvesting schedule to perhaps concentrate even more on the denser areas that interfere with boating and swimming and fishing, and perhaps allow more weed growth in other areas of the lake? Is that
for what harvesting you're doing, there are still plenty of areas for plenty of plant. There's plenty of areas that aren't harvested. So you still have plenty of plant growth. I wouldn't worry too much about modifying the harvesting program. I mean, obviously you want to focus on those areas where there's recreational impact, but I would focus more on the nutrients. Focus on getting the nutrients under control. Then you can start playing around with the harvesting. I mean, the harvesting still has value in terms of removing nutrients that would otherwise, when those plants die, those nutrients are then available for algae. So when you're removing plants through harvesting, and you're not harvesting to the point where you have no weeds, you have plenty of plants out there. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about the harvesting. I would focus more on phosphorus removal.
I just have a quick question. You heard rumors that aeration was good, and does that have any impact on the stirring up of the lake?
Well, that's why we're going to do that analysis of the 30-year database, because we want to see, should we take care of that internal load? And there are two ways you generally take care of the internal load. One is you can mix the entire water column, or two is you can add a product like alum that inactivates that phosphorus. I can't say one way or another whether we're going to do that until we do that analysis. I can say that if we want carryover habitat for brown trout, I would move away from aeration in that main body. Now, aeration can still be very important in a lot of the coves and bays where you have a lot of still water areas. Because remember, the three things you need for the cyanobacteria is still water conditions, elevated phosphorus concentrations, higher water temperatures. So there is a value to circulating water. And that could be done on a case-by-case basis, and as part of the demonstration projects, we're certainly going to consider circulation in some of those smaller cove areas. So aeration is sort of twofold. There's the aeration of the entire lake vertically, and then there's aeration horizontally in the bays and coves.
Now, do you do Lake Mohawk as well?
Yes.
And because I grew up there, you literally jumped into pea soup. But I noticed the last 2 years, the lake looked.
Well, we've been working on Lake, I've been working on Lake Hopatcong with Steve Souza since the early 90s. And you're right, when I first started as a consultant, we'd go up to Mohawk and sample in the winter, and the ice was green.
Yeah.
Because they would literally have year-round blooms. They're still a pretty productive system, but they've done a lot to the lake. So they have a destratification system that keeps the lake well mixed, and we have data to show that they don't have that depletion of dissolved oxygen the way we see at Lake Hopatcong. They have an alum injection system that, certain times of the year when there's a storm event, they'll inject low-dose concentrations of alum. They have at least 12 of these large regional settling basins that they've installed. They have a very aggressive septic management program, very aggressive lawn fertilizer ban. So they've been implementing things over the last 20 to 30 years that have really turned their lake around. So that's what we're looking at Lake Hopatcong. So the focus is a lot on the watershed because 80% of that load is coming from the watershed. But we are now looking, okay, what can we do in the lake itself to take care of these?
Anyway, it was this, the 5-foot drawdown. Did that have any effect whatsoever on this past summer?
See, and that's the thing, it might have been one of those factors that contributed to the lower amounts of weeds. I mean, it wasn't that the crews weren't out there, they were looking for the plants, it's just there wasn't as much biomass. And so there's three components, like I mentioned. One was it was a wet spring. And actually 2018 was a wet year as well, a wet, cool year. The second component was the drawdown. So, and usually to have a real effective plant kill for a drawdown, you need a real cold winter. And our last winter wasn't, it was cold, but it wasn't a record snapping situation. But then we had the halves as well, early in the season. Now, we frequently get those blooms at Lake Hopatcong. We've had them for years, but they tend to happen September, October, after Labor Day, so when people aren't recreating as much. This was the first year in a long time that it happened in June. It wasn't just Hopatcong, lakes in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. And one of the reasons why I think it persisted in Lake Hopatcong was that internal load. So once the algae got in the lake, they could continue by harvesting that phosphorus deep in the, and that's why we wanted to do that study, to tease that apart.
The wetland quarry spill created a greater turbidity in the north end of the lake. Does that have something to do with the less fewer weeds? Because I heard that there's still an awful lot of weeds in the lake.
Yeah, see, That area has been notoriously low on weeds for decades. In the past, what we've seen up there in that specific area was a lot of this heavy, it almost looks black, it's this heavy blue-green algae called Lingia. And it can be problematic, but a lot of times it dwells immediately over the sediments and would just hang out down there. And that's good because it just stays down there. What we've seen over the last maybe 10 years is less of that Lingia. I can't attribute that to anything that the quarry's doing. There's no easy correlation that, oh, there was a spill and then there was a fish kill, a plant kill. I can say that that area has not had a lot of plant growth for quite some time.
Thank you.
Right? Thank you.
Okay, moving along, reports kind of short. Last week, I met with Senator Bucco late in the afternoon to see what the status of legislation and where we would go, and you all got copies of the email I had Colleen forward to everybody on the commission. And just today at lunch, we met with Assemblywoman DeCroce's chief of staff and another person from her office to find out again where we're going. So we just want to see what happens with the DEP and what happens with our grant before we look at the next step. Apparently, our legislation is not going to move in the lame duck session, so we're hopeful now that it'll be during the spring before the budget will get included in the budget process. Then we don't have to worry about whether we even getting something. Like ours comes from fees, we're not a line item in the budget, or as a result of motor vehicle fees or both. So we're hoping that we can get like that locked in, so that it's not like, well, this year we don't have it. So that's all I have. Anybody else, guys want to have a?
Nope, just see we're making good progress on what we are. Hopefully we get that grant.
That's the thing now. Just want to lay low till we get that approved. That'd be great.
Mr. Chairman, it's just good to be back again.
Excuse me?
It's just good to be back for me. Been away a long time.
He's glad to be back. He's been away a long time.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back. So, we got the towns now, the 4 towns, the 4 mayors that contribute something, in-kind services with the cleaning out storm sewers and so forth, and the 2 counties to contribute, and our money, and Marty again getting them to change their philosophy about cash up front. So I'm hopeful we're going to get that with the door level project to make a difference. At least show the people that we're doing something. And figure out which of these projects work best. Maybe more than one of them. Let's see what works. Okay.
That comes for the sewer. On that.
Hudson Avenue, right? Hudson Avenue.
Hudson Avenue.
Okay. Josh, you were in.
Yeah, let's
Somebody else. Stop your head.
Well, I'll mostly give a State Department update.
Yep. What's that?
So we're still in the disassembly process and assessing the repair.
Rachel, would you speak louder, please?
Absolutely. We're still in the disassembly process and assessing routine and major repairs needed for the equipment, and we're still working with the school harvester. We're working with the vendors. All the vendors we work with need to update their paperwork and information on the day start part of business requirements. So right now, that's our challenge. Usually the kind of sit and wait process where you call and ask, and then you have to wait on the vendor to get it done. But we're working on that. We've already submitted a purchase order for McMillan Oil to purchase hydraulic oil and grease. And other than that, it's basically the same process of just working the machine and getting prices, trying to get parts, and purchasing items. And as far as the water level goes, we're in the process of the winter drawdown where we're holding the level at the moment until we begin refilling in a couple months.
And then, for some DEP updates, no updates on the Walden Quarry, though I see there was a letter from the quarry included in our package tonight. The CAC meeting, the Citizen Advisory Committee meeting, we're looking to just try to finalize the date. We're hoping to still do it yet sometime at the end of January, the first part of February. So that will be coming shortly. And that will also sort of be the kickoff for the water level management plan. So, but there'll be more information coming on that.
What about the next one? Hey, I submitted a draft ordinance to my fellow committee members. I took the Hopatcong ordinance, I made some changes to it. I have some comments from Commissioner Stevens, which make really good sense, and I got some comments tonight from Dr. Steinbaum, which also are worthy. So I'd like to update that. In the meantime, Mayor Francis, Hopatcong's mayor, has asked me, he just called me up during a conversation, he asked me to just prepare and update the Hopatcong ordinance. So I basically submitted to him what I submitted to my fellow commissioners, because he wants to act on it fairly quickly. I haven't had a chance to follow up with him. This was about 2 weeks ago that I submitted this revised ordinance. The other bit of news, I'm going to just see if I can dig for it. I was asked by the PD Club to prepare an article on ice safety for inclusion in the newsletter. And I'll pass it on, if I find it, I'll pass it on a couple of copies.
I placed them outside.
Okay, thank you. That's Mr. Maloney who actually asked me to write the article. So there are copies outside, feel free to pick them up. Basically, it's a summary of how to properly install systems, what the concerns are. One of the main points is to express to homeowners the liability risk that they have for maintaining these systems if they're not looked after, if they're not maintained, if they're allowed to careen out of control and keep large areas of the lake open, so many grounds. I hate to say it, I'm sure there's going to be a lawsuit, and I hate to even think about loss of life that would have to precede the lawsuit, but it's just something that people need to be keenly aware of.
Dan, has that been shared with the other towns, or is that?
We're going to be meeting, I think, with the mayors. I think, Colleen, we're going to have a meeting with the 4 mayors coming up. And
Yeah, what's the next mayor meeting scheduled?
Yeah, we need to know.
yes,
Season.
yes. No, we wanted to meet with the mayors. We were supposed to meet last month, but then their agenda was a little bit too big. We found that we couldn't be included. So we're going to be at their very next meeting. Do we have any idea when that date is? Or?
We haven't set that yet. It's always a little tricky to get 4 mayors in the room, so we have to schedule one date. So hopefully the end of the month or early.
Yeah, well, maybe we closed on until the end of the month, so, it's a question of, try to get a date, and he'll have to have someone filling for him, but otherwise.
What was the date, Jordan?
We didn't have the date set yet because of the meeting coming up, but,
Okay.
but we were looking at end of January or February.
I have a couple of copies of this pass through each way of this article. As escalate. In addition to the ones that Mr. Maloney, thank you very much for bringing along with you. That's all I just. That's it, I'm done. Greg?
Planning, do you want to take that? Or should I? To the planning, well, we had a budget committee meeting over the phone, followed up by a meeting with myself, Todd, and Colleen, and then followed by joining the planning committee meeting. And we made some suggestions. one of which you'll hear enacted today. We recommended that we hire a city planner who will go to meetings of all the boards in the 4 towns and discuss how we feel too many variances have been given out, the impervious requirements have been too low for the entire watershed, and we want to see if the 4 towns can get together, make some stricter rules for building on the lake, extending all the way up to the watershed, because the main cause, as you've heard, of our problems that we can control. We can't control the weather, but we certainly can make a big effort to control what goes in the lake. And this is primarily runoff in the whole watershed. So we want to attack this in a long-term way, short-term and long-term, by hiring this person who's very experienced and skilled in this area, to attend the meetings, to counsel the members on what regulations should be used around the lake, such as this, to improve the lake and preserve it, and then to attend those critical meetings where people are going for variances that they may not be entitled to without a significant hardship. So we look at this as one area where we can make a difference. The other area we discussed is looking into hiring a stormwater facilities manager. This would be a person who's familiar with the stormwater facilities that have already been placed in the lake that we found have not been maintained adequately over the years. They used to be maintained largely by the town's DPW departments with the help of someone who worked for the commission. And we're hoping on finding a person who's familiar with these installations, who's been trained in their cleaning out, that we can pay part-time to work with the towns to get them again cleaning out these facilities properly. So that's the other recommendation of the planning committee. We'd like to seek such a person, and we think we have the funding initially to get this started. Do you have anything to add?
No, it's pretty comprehensive. Thank you. Anything on the budget? Budget's in here.
In this, you've all seen the budget. Is there any questions rather than go into details? We're locked into our $500,000, which we get from the state by way of licensing fees on motorboat operations. Of that money, $355,000, up to that amount, we pay to the DEP to conduct the weed harvest, which leaves us with only $145,000 to do everything for the lake. This, in our opinion, this is untenable, and we're hoping, to get more funding. We're applying for grants. We'll continue to do that. We're very disappointed that the governor and the state legislature were able to pass a funding bill, but we hope so in the future. And it makes us think that we have to, again, consider ways of self-funding, which proved to be unpopular to some of us in our last discussion. But I think we'll have to think about it again, such as full use of these.
And then, in fairness to the DEP, we got a $50-some thousand. We didn't spend the so we spent about, round numbers, $300,000. So we put the 355 in because we don't know if it could be what it is. Again, if they don't spend it, we'll get a refund.
And this money is allowing us to hire this city planner, which will be a part-time person, a consultant actually, and to possibly hire someone to help with the stormwater problem.
And apply for, as part
I'm sorry?
of, and to use for part of match in the grant.
Yes.
So we're gonna deal with that when we get to the resolution. Now, open the meeting to the public. Anybody have any comments?
Fred, I was just wondering, what are the qualifications? Oh, Carol Kitchen, Jessica's mother. What are the qualifications of the people that do the harvesting? Are they, you know,
What are the qualifications?
yeah, I mean, so I guess the question I'm saying is, could somebody that's doing the harvesting, could they fill that role? Do they have the qualifications to be an adjunct to help with the storm drainage?
It's a possibility. At least one of them does. At least one of them does. Mike Calderio, who's the director, he was on the commission at its inception and when employees were first hired. And he was involved in the program where during the spring and during the fall, we had commission employees go to each town and assist the towns with catch basin retrofit, cleanouts, maintenance. And he was also part of the group that went around through the watershed and GPS mapped all the locations of the outfalls and projects. So I think.
So that wasn't a new idea.
Yeah, it's not a new idea. We're trying to bring that back.
Just trying to get it back.
It's a lot of this way back when was mindset, because the idea behind these catch basins is from a Department of Transportation perspective, is to get the water off the road for road safety. Nobody thinks about what happens to it when it takes all the sand and sediment and anything else that's flushed into it and how it ends up in the lake. So back then, it really helped change the mindset of the local road departments and got them thinking beyond just getting water off the road. And they're drifted away from that now because we haven't been there to remind them and have this drive.
And just another little question about that, and you probably would have the answer. You know, we're treating the roads now. Does that have any impact to what we're putting in the lake? You know, we're putting that brine on it.
Possible, I'm sure it has some effect.
It sure does, it sure does. As a matter of fact, one of the things is that we're not sure how good a job the towns and the counties are doing cleaning up afterward. But also, there's other substances that are becoming available that are more expensive, that are much less toxic. And one of the things is we want to look into that. But all of these things cost money.
We're hopeful to get additional legislation passed in the spring session of the legislature prior to the budget process to increase our 500,000, and then we can deal. We got a good idea how to spend it.
I do think, though, Fred said at one meeting that the amount of salt and brine really doesn't affect the phosphorus level, but it kills the vegetation, which the vegetation will help filter.
You notice you get on the side of your driveway, it kills the grass.
Yeah, my master's degree was on the impact of alternative de-icers on aquatic systems. And I did a lot of work up at Tahoe back in the late 80s or early 90s, and there, what they were seeing was it's not necessarily that the salt stimulates algae growth or anything, but like you were saying, it kills the plants. And then they were seeing all this erosion because of all the dead vegetation, and the erosion, a lot of your phosphorus is stuck on the soil particles. So without the vegetation holding that soil was slumping into the lake, and then that was stimulating algae.
Now, did it help having like the road cleanup, the road sweepers? Did that help?
Yeah, it's a variety, and it's weird because I remember like in the 80s, early 90s, people were very gung-ho about, doing more pre-treatment. Don't wait for the snow to hit, add a little so that you can prevent the ice bonds from forming. You end up using less product if you added a little. I mean, I like the parking lot where our office is, after a storm, it looks white because they must just paint so much of it on. So it's like, using the proper amount. There's more expensive products, but a lot of municipalities will mix it with road salt to reduce the amount of salt. There's all sorts of gadgets to, dose out the material as opposed to just having a hopper and just having it spray out. So there are all sorts of ways you can manage the use of those materials that aren't going to compromise safety, but at the same time minimize environmental impact.
And how many of the towns do a road clean, the road sweepers?
We all
You have to.
do. They have some-
Do you? Okay.
And they're doing it more frequently.
I know Jefferson does, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they leave a lot, but they're not very efficient.
Anyone else? Go to public session, now we have action items. A, I want to add one item based on our executive session. Item H would be to hire Colleen to SA's efforts. Two consultants, they're both at $105 an hour, and they're both kind of local, one is from Newton, one from Wantage, I think, but they've got extensive experience appearing before local planning boards. And so those are the people that Dr. Steinbach was talking about that would go and help with.
Getting the ordinances under control.
Yeah, but, so we got, A through H, if anybody want to move those items, and then we can discuss them one at a time if you want.
So moved.
As a block, second.
Now, if anybody has any questions on anything A through H, you need a little more information before you
On
vote?
the planner, since there's two, I think, and since the one guy's gone, I know they'll work together, so we're gonna set the rate at $105, maybe make him the lead, because Eric's gone maybe 3 months or 2 months a year, and just to specify her to coordinate with colleagues.
So they can cover whenever these meetings happen in the local towns, if they're not always available, we'll only we have coverage no matter what.
That's all.
So they're gonna have to sit down and work together. That's the point.
They already, and they know that,
Okay.
they're going to do it.
I've been on planning board for 8 years before I was council, and Mark's been on that law and the zoning board. That's 4-hour meeting, 5-hour meetings on that.
Yeah.
A lot of money you can spend pretty quick.
Yeah, hopefully you can get it.
Well, when he gets it on the agenda, we can ask to get it moved up on the agenda, we can hear a case and leave.
means there was something for it.
Okay.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
the workshop, you know, I go to the workshop.
I mean, I work for the Board of Education, a lot of times, order somebody, we put the item up on the front of the agenda, so I have to stay all night, listen to it.
That's why I said
That's what they do that.
Yeah, and
That's
I
what you
can,
call Steve.
I can alternate, if there's meetings that I can still attend, because that's what I've been doing currently.
All right, so we have a motion and a second, roll, Colleen?
Sorry.
Roll the roll.
Crowley,
Yes.
Fish,
Yes.
McCarthy,
Yes.
Wadowski,
Yes.
Ross. Yes. Steinbaum,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Tessier,
Yes.
Salara,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes. Let's take a motion.
Wait. One thing that happened last meeting, so it's just a technicality, but our meeting minutes didn't pass. So if we could just take a quick roll call, just so we're doing it by book. From November, we only had 5 yeses because not everybody who was in attendance was in attendance at the November meeting.
Right, we watched it, we should have announced it.
Well, I counted Neil not realizing that Mark was here, so I had 6, but we had alternated to that.
All right.
So can I get a,
Motion to approve the minutes of the November commission meeting.
Second.
Comments, questions? Roll.
Okay, Crowley,
Yes.
Fish,
Yes.
McCarthy,
Abstain.
Ozowski,
Abstain.
Ross. Yes. Steinbaum,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Tessier,
Yes.
Salara,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Now, make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
8:34.